Hey everyone. Back during the pandemic, as a lot of us were, I was a little freaked out listening to some things I wouldn't normally listen to, and I got into listening to Emerick Jones, mostly for entertainment. And at that time, I did a three-parter on Emerick Jones, both on his life, the things that influenced him, and the book that he claimed set him on his path to some craziness. A review of None Dare Call It Conspiracy, and I did that in three different parts. But being that a lot of you like the longer style videos, even over an hour, I decided that I would go ahead and give you the extended version of that video in one huge piece, and that's what I'm doing here for you today. The original three will still be in the original three parts if you want to break it up, and it will be there with my expose on QAnon under a playlist for conspiracy theory. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be back real soon. Thanks a lot.
Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Crime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Thanks, everyone.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. Today we are delving into the crazy world of Emerick Jones. And I know you probably know Emerick Jones best for this.
Look it up for yourself. I mean, this is what do you think tap water is? It's a gay bomb, baby. And I'm not saying people didn't naturally have homosexual feelings. I'm not even getting into it, quite frankly. I mean, give me a break. You think I'm like, shocked by it, so I'm up here bashing it because I don't like gay people? I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
But really, Emerick Jones is so much more than the crazy frogs are gay man. He is a very influential person in American conservative politics, and I don't say that lightly. We're talking about a man that today still gets 6 million views a month on his own website, Infowars.com. Now, that's without any outside marketing, because as you know, about a year ago, he was banned from Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the whole 9 yards, banned, gone. So everything that he generates organically himself. Also, because he was also banned by YouTube and therefore Google, he is no longer an AdSense partner, so he doesn't get the normal type of advertising that one would get, yet he still sustains a media empire with what he's able to drive organically. Now, whatever you think of Emerick Jones, you have to admire that one piece of him. I'm not here to condemn Emerick Jones. I'm not here to be pro-Emerick Jones. I am neutral Emerick Jones, and I am going to tell you his story. And I'm going to break it into several different parts. Background, early days on public access. Then I'm going to get into actually the building of the InfoWars empire. And then also, of course, the various scandals. We're talking Pizzagate. We're talking his views on the Sandy Hook. We're right down to gay chemicals and turning the frogs gay. We're going to talk about it all. And I'm about to jump into it, but first, a little bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to join my community down below, that join tab is right next to the subscribe button. Also the link to my Patreon. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my wonderful patrons. And again, I'll put a timestamp down below if you'd like to skip this. I certainly understand if you do. But a shout out to my wonderful patrons. Roderick Hope, Mira Watt, Maybe Sunshine, Laurie Holmes, Zachary Reese, Kimberly Jolly, Kat Whitlett, Lauren Kirk, Sarah Carney, Andrea Lee, Tabora Summers Cooper, and Demelza Pasco. And to my wonderful, wonderful channel members, Dr. Debo Cherry, Chef Betsy, Mama Bear, Stephanie Soresi, Lauren Cass, Zachary Reese, Flame Lily, Hippie Dotson, Joe Guitar, Katrina Militant, Enigma X, Sherry Hendricks, Maybe Sunshine, Stephanie Mertz. Thank you so much for everything that you do. If it wasn't for you guys, it would be much harder to do this because, you know, you help me pay for the stuff that makes the channel go round. So, with that being said, let's dive into Alex Jones. Alex Emerick Jones was born February 11th, 1974, so he is very solidly a Gen Xer, just like myself, in Dallas, Texas. And he was raised in a very unusual situation for Gen Xers, and I'll tell you why. He was actually raised in the suburbs, not that that was unusual, but he was raised by a two-parent family. His father was a dentist, and his mother stayed at home. Well, why do I say that's unusual? Because Gen X, whose parents were either of the silent generation, which my parents are both silent generation, the generation that actually either fought World War II or born during World War II, they were a very different generation. They stayed together because they sort of had to. It's what was done. However, most Gen Xers parents are baby boomers, and baby boomers were those that came alive, that were growing up during the sexual revolution and all kinds of stuff, so divorce became more common. And so that's the reason, and I came from a divorced family, even though my parents were silent generation. They actually, a lot of Gen X kids were what we call latchkey kids. We actually raised ourselves for the most part. Both either we had single parent head of household that had to work multiple jobs, which was my case, or we had two parents that both worked. And so for the first few hours of every evening, we were home alone. Lots of times we would get up and get ourselves ready for school. Our parents would drop us at school on the way to their job, or we would ride the bus, or we would walk, and then we would come home to an empty house in the afternoon, and from 3:30 to 6:37, whenever parents got home from work, we were home alone. Lots of us would get our own homework done, entertain ourselves. We watched a lot of television and played a lot of Atari and a lot of Nintendo. It's the reason most of us are nerds. But we also would do things like get dinner started, so we were a very independent and almost nihilistic generation. And I'm not ashamed of that. We're very self-reliant. And so I'm not getting into a lecture on the differences of the generation. If you'd like to see me compare generations, silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X, millenniums, Gen-Xers, let me know down below. I'd be happy to do some wacky comparison like that. But Alex Jones was the exception to that rule. He still had two parents at home, and one of his parents was home. His mom was home all the time. So he had a very idealistic, almost Beaver Cleaver kind of bringing up, and I think that's what imparted in him his very conservative. And so, on top of that, upper middle class, dentist. So it inspired in him a conservative viewpoint. And being raised in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, also very conservative Southern viewpoint. So that's how he grew up. He had a very traditional Southern growing up, where he played football at the local high school, Anderson High School in Austin, where they relocated before he got into high school. And he played football, he played baseball, he played basketball. So very traditional, worshiping at the altar of Friday Night Lights for Alex Jones, which is very, very common for our generation. And he also read a book while in high school that would change his life. Gary Allen's None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And don't worry, the second or third part of this series on Alex Jones will be a complete review of the life of fellow conspiracy theorist Gary Allen, as well as a complete review and summary of that book. And let me tell you, it will mess with your mind. So I can understand me reading it, 45 years old, with my understanding of the world, I'm sure is a lot different than young Alex Jones reading it at 16 or 17 and having a young, impressionable mind where he's pretty much grown up in an echo chamber, as a lot of us do. And so, yeah, you're going to see how it kind of shaped his view of the world and how he's expanded upon it and actually created an empire from it. He did graduate from Anderson High School in 1993, same year I graduated from high school. And he attended briefly a local community college, Austin Community College, but he dropped out because he saw no need for a college education. I honestly wish I had gone that route too, because I really do nothing associated with my degree in political science other than talk politics to family members. I've learned not to talk about it on my YouTube channel. I do apologize for that. It was a bad day. But anyway, so he decided that he could better send his path because he wanted to be a journalist. He didn't think you needed education to be a journalist. And so it was his desire to create his own media company that led him to his very first stint in broadcast media. And that was on local Austin public access in the early 90s. And so the Alex Jones Show was born on public access in 1995 in Austin, Texas. Now, you're probably wondering, how was this young 20-year-old just able to walk into a television network and get his own show? Well, it's public access. It is, if you are a tax-paying member of the community and your community has public access, and they were very common in the 80s and 90s, you can have a show. You don't get paid for it. You can only get paid if you get advertisers to advertise on your show, but it's all up to you. You pay to do the show. They'll give you a time slot. And so he did this himself. It was literally called just the Alex Jones Show, and it was, of course, about conservative topics, conservative politics, and conspiracy theory. And I have a clip for you of Alex Jones, Halloween, 1997, taking some calls on his show, because not only did he had a very late slot for his show, it was like a 10 p.m. slot, but on this Halloween, the host of the show ahead of him needed the night off, so he took over his show. And what did Alex Jones do? He carved a pumpkin and took calls about conspiracy theories. And that's what we're going to take a look at right here.
Hours a day, they say.
Yeah, pretty close.
Well, I can assure you I don't make any money off public access. I can guarantee you that.
Well, you guys have a good one.
Hey, appreciate that call. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, Alex, how you doing?
Pretty good.
I was just kind of curious if it's true that the police can have laser or infrared beams, if you want to call it, and they can project those into your house to basically...
Yeah, the Austin Police Department's, last time I heard, has 20 units with infrared. If you have enough of a heat source in your house, it'll pick up the heat source and show a signature. It's called flare. It's infrared or heat signature, and we didn't play all of the cut from the Lear News Hour, but it says yes, black helicopters are being used for surveillance of the public by sheriff's departments and police departments around the country. So that's real, and I'm going to play that tomorrow night from 8:30 on past 10 on my Access Television show. That's actually my show proper, just as an entertainment show. And I'm going to have a tax expert on. So you'll see the Lear News Hour, a short little cut for news reasons. That'll show you Lear News Hour saying, yeah, here's the black helicopters. The military has sold them to the police departments all over the country. They've got thousands of them. They've got thousands of tanks.
And that was public access. That's exactly what most of them look like. You'll see a lot of movies that came out in the 80s and 90s with things being set in public access television stations. There's a lot of shows that are still on today that started on public access. One of my favorites, The Atheist Experience, hosted by my friend, I'm glad to call him friend, Matt Delahanty, is still streaming live on the internet. It started on the same public access network as the Alex Jones Show. So lots of good stuff and lots of bad stuff going on in Austin. So that's where Alex Jones got his start, and it became the model for what would become InfoWars. Call in, him taking news of the day and kind of analyzing it and feeding it to his viewers. That's what he did. And it was from there that he caught the eye of a local conservative talk radio station, KFJK 98.9 FM in Austin, and he was actually offered a paid show called Final Edition in 1996. So from 1996 through 1999, he was doing both the public access and the radio show. And this was just basic conservative talk radio. I'm sure most of you know conservative talk radio is a format that is still very popular to this day. There's even channels for it on both on Sirius, on XM, or Sirius XM, as well as lots of conservative talk on the internet. Liberal talk has not ever quite caught on the way conservative talk is. And so he could have been a very successful conservative talk show host if he had just kind of stayed the way. But what happened to him? Well, he veered off the path of just regular old conservative politics into the land of extreme conspiracy theory. Not only did he read Gary Allen's book while he was in high school, in 1995, something happened to change the face of the United States forever, and that was the Oklahoma City bombing. And I do plan to do a video on that. But in a synopsis, a gentleman by the name of Timothy McVeigh and his partner, Terry Nichols, as revenge for the Ruby Ridge siege and murder, 2 members of the Weaver family took place in Idaho in 1992. Basically, Randy Weaver was brought up on what most consider trumped-up federal firearms charges, and he did not go to court. So they brought out a ton of federal marshals, a ton of FBI, and they laid siege to the compound that he and his family lived in Ruby Ridge, Idaho. It was basically, they lived off the grid. They kept to themselves. It was the members of the Weaver family as well as their friend Kevin Harris. And for 11 days, they laid siege to these, 7 people in a cabin trying to bring them to justice. Basically, the gist of it is they wanted him to turn informant on some supposed white supremacists that were doing illegal things with firearms nearby, and he wouldn't roll over. We didn't want any part of it, so they trumped up these charges. And yes, I don't normally say the government, I'm not normally a government conspiracist, but Ruby Ridge was messed up. Ruby Ridge should never have happened. It was wrong from the get-go. And as a result, his wife, Vicky, and his son, Sammy Weaver, the family dog named Stryker, and a federal agent by the name of Bill Deegan were all killed needlessly. And to bring the entire family, there's actually a great movie starring Randy Quaid, ironically, that shows what happened at Ruby Ridge, and it is something I will be covering for the month of Halloween, so stay tuned. But Oklahoma City, which took place April 19th, 1995, was a revenge by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols on the federal government for what happened at Ruby Ridge. So you see how this stuff just kind of, spars more tragedy. Well, they drove a truck filled with homemade bombs to the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, killing hundreds, including children, and that was revenge for Ruby Ridge. It was also believed that Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, who were both former military, they were survivalists. I'm sure they read Gary Allen's book. They also were known, especially McVeigh, to be fans of the book, The Turner Diaries, which I have reviewed. It's the most evil book I've ever written in my life, but if you want to dare, it's an age-restricted video, as I'm sure this one will be. You can find it right up there at that link if you want to find out what was in that book. But he was radicalized by Ruby Ridge and that book. And as a result, Emerick Jones was radicalized by the Oklahoma City bombings. He was noted as saying on his talk radio show, The Final Edition, on regular conservative talk and on his public access show, that there is a kleptocracy at work with psychopathic governments, and they have us all in their clutches of evil, and that everything they do is to control us. And it was this premise that caused him to first enter the world of filmmaking when he produced the film in 1998, America Destroyed by Design, where he put forth his design that Oklahoma City was also may have been an inside job as well. And if that wasn't enough, and Branch Davidian compound at Waco, Texas, under cult leader David Koresh, they were the victims of a self-inflicted fire, as far as the evidence that we know are. And I know there's going to be a lot of conspiracy people that watch this video. I understand that one of the common consensus is the government set that fire. But as far as we know, it was set by members of the Branch Davidians who had already killed a lot of the people in the compound. But in any case, it was a siege by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And I actually remember this because I had pneumonia. I was actually in the Army. I was in a military hospital with pneumonia, and I watched it happen live on television that final day where it went up in smoke. I laid there and I watched it happen. So anyway, that coupled with Oklahoma City is really what sent Alex Jones into a spiral of not trusting the government. The government can't be trusted. The government is evil, it's corrupt, and it's the source of the evil that will one day manifest itself into the New World Order, which, if you haven't heard, is all the governments of the world coming under the control of one unifying body. There is only one religion, the religion that they allow us to have. There's only one currency. There's only one loyalty. There's only one way of life. And it will essentially turn the world into a unified country of sorts. And that's why there's such a pushback toward the globalist way that business tends to go. So I think that it's all kind of feeding into it. There's enough truth in conspiracy, I think, to really peak even normal. Like some of the stuff I read in Gary Allen's book made the hair on the back of my head stand up. So I think there's enough truth in conspiracy to make anyone crack. And if you already have a propensity for that kind of thing, like Alex Jones did, then it can really cause you to spiral out of control. And so, because he believed the Branch Davidians, a massacre was caused by the government, because he believed Oklahoma City was actually done by the government, because he had read Gary Allen's book and he believed vehemently in the New World Order, he felt it was his time to take his message global and save the United States from the wrath of the impending evil. And so with the 1993 tragedy of Waco, the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, and then his spin on it, his 1998 film, as you can imagine, his popularity on Austin conservative talk radio took off. In 1999, he was nominated, tying with one of the most popular talk radio hosts in all of Austin, Shannon Burke, for the best of Austin talk radio. He was voted, they tied dead even, voted by the people of Austin in the local Austin Chronicle. However, even though he was super popular, the producers of his show were not pleased with him, the radio station. In fact, they were pretty angry with him because of a stunt that he pulled New Year's Eve, 1999. As we were going into Y2K, into the year 2000, there was a scare known as the Y2K bug, and I have a video about it, I'll be happy to link right up here, that said that because programmers had tried to save space, that all computer hardware software was built to only comprehend a 2-digit year. And that was fine, as long as the year stayed something outside of the realm of 00. Well, because 1999 was about to become the year 2000, well, Alex Jones, both via his public access program and his show on conservative talk radio, broadcast an Orson Welles War of the Worlds type inflammatory broadcast where he took snippets of news, like a nuclear power plant having to go offline for a little while in Pennsylvania, or one gas station running out of gas. He took all these little bits and pieces of, like Russian troops on the move. Anything that he could pull out that could be attributed to global computer failure in the face of Y2K, he weaved it together into his own little tale of terror, like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, where people actually thought aliens were really invading the Earth. And he did this, and he caused widespread panic among his listeners. And this even caught the eye and brought forth the anger of a fellow conspiracy theorist by the name of Bill Cooper. Now, Bill Cooper was a mentor of Alex Jones. Bill Cooper was old school conspiracy theory, right up there with Gary Allen. And I'm going to give you a little synopsis on him, and then I'm going to play you a clip that was from Bill Cooper's show the day after Alex Jones' broadcast, the one he was fired for, from the conservative talk radio station, and how Bill Cooper came down on him for doing it. Now, when another conspiracy theorist who's as far out there as Cooper comes down on you, Mr. Jones, you may have gone a bit too far. But I'm going to give you a little background on who Bill Cooper is so that you can understand the magnitude of how off the rails this Alex Jones broadcast was. And I'm going to play you a snippet from Bill Cooper's show. It is a long snippet, but I highly recommend you listen to it because he also plays clips of the Alex Jones broadcast and breaks it down for you. So, with that, let's get into Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper was born in 1943 to an Air Force family, a Lieutenant Colonel, Milton Vance Cooper, and his wife, Dovie. And not a whole lot is known about his early life. We do know that he did claim to serve in the United States Navy, the United States Air Force, and Naval Intelligence until being discharged in 1975. As I said, I can't affirm or deny that because no one seems to know. There is a brief mention in some records of him having briefly served in the United States Navy, advancing to the rank of Petty Officer Second Class. He also attended vocational tech school in California and worked as a teacher in several of those tech schools over the years. He was also a huge fan of conspiracy theory. He read Gary Allen's book. And in 1992, he began his own talk radio show based on conspiracy. It was broadcast through several independent radio stations as well as over other means, not the internet, but like private ham radio, not ham, but private radio airwaves, short distance, long distance radio networks would carry it. And so it was the early form of being able to get something via the web. And it was called the Hour of the Time. And anybody that had shortwave frequency radios or a satellite could get the show. And he ran this from his home in Eager, Arizona, not far from the New Mexico border. In 1991, he wrote and published his first book, Behold a Pale Horse, which basically had the same spin as the book we're going to cover, that all governments are working together with international banking to form the New World Order, and that a well-organized, regulated militia of citizenry is the only way to defeat that. This book became quite critical to even UFO conspiracies because he did believe in aliens. He believed in that the HIV virus was man-made, and it was released upon the world to kill off homosexuals and kill off people that used intravenous drugs, or even like people with blood ailments where you have to have blood transfusions, just all kinds of weird stuff. And this has become quite popular among conspiracy theories, this Behold a Pale Horse. If you guys want me to read it, I'll be happy to. Just link it, let me know below. And it is quite influential in the militia movements and other conspiracy movements of the day. In fact, Terry Nichols, Timothy McVeigh's co-conspirator in the Oklahoma City bombing, was known to have carried a copy of it on him. So you could thank the Hold a Pale Horse as well as Turner Diaries for that mess. Anyway, this is who Bill Cooper was. And it was him, among others, that said Alex Jones went too far December 31st, 1999. And so let's take a page out of Bill Cooper's radio broadcast and listen to what he has to say about his young prodigy, protege, Alex Jones. Dropping that right here.
Lights out for the curfew of your body, soul, and
You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I got the tapes that you sent me, Liz, and a few of you others who sent me tapes from December the 31st. And I have been doing exactly what I told you I was going to do. I've been going through them today, and I was going to edit a big long tape of and it's difficult. I've got to tell you, there is so much fear mongering and so much inaccurate reporting and all kinds of stuff that it's hard. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make the rest of this week a series of this stuff. And tonight's going to sort of set the stage. And you'll discover, if you were listening last night, why what you're going to hear tonight is so important. These are just short snippets of the Alex Jones show from New Year's Eve, December the 31st. This is news. This is news, ladies and gentlemen. What you're going to hear here, what he's saying is deception. It's fear-mongering. It scared the hell out of literally millions of people, and it got worse later. You're not even going to hear the worst part. You're just going to hear the beginning, because what you're going to hear tonight is just taken from the first 45 minutes of his broadcast. His broadcast on December the 31st, New Year's Eve. These are just little snippets taken from the first 45 minutes of the Alex Jones show. I didn't take everything that was scary, because we don't have time to do that if we're going to talk about it. But I took just little snippets from the first 45 minutes, and his broadcast, I think, is 3 hours long. And it gets a lot worse as time goes on. You can hear the fear and the excitement and the adrenaline in Alex Jones's voice later on. You're not going to hear so much of that in the early stages of the broadcast. And then he goes on later on the Midas report with Michael Trudeau, and it totally gets out of hand. What you're going to hear is a build-up, and then later. And this is what makes me think that the whole thing was staged, because this buildup sets the stage for full-blown panic across the country later. And you'll hear about that either tomorrow night or Thursday. But you're going to hear it, because this is just absolutely incredible. So stay tuned, folks, and be careful. You'll all get scared. I mean, just listening to this stuff on New Year's Eve, December the 31st, I had do you think this may be what they were trying to create? I don't know this for sure, but you'll see as we go through these 3 nights and you hear the build-up to what could have been an absolute catastrophe. And it all came from these people. And it's just absolutely incredible. I mean, people really went off the deep end. A lot of people got scared. Some people got sick. A lot of people headed literally for the hills just from listening to these guys. This is not a joke. I'm not kidding you. It really happened, just exactly as I've described. So stay tuned. You're going to hear it all. It's incredible, too. That's right, folks. I'm your man. The only thing you ever get from the Hour of the Time is the truth. Now, I want you to understand that this little series that we're doing is nothing personal against Alex Jones or anybody else. But I happen to know for a fact, absolute fact, and listen to me very carefully, that people who practice this kind of broadcasting and claim to be an American patriot do nothing but discredit all of us eventually. It's wrong. It is absolutely wrong. This guy would take a call, and some caller would report something, and instead of saying, well, we're not, like I do on this broadcast, when somebody calls in and wants to tell a rumor, I tell them, no, we don't do that on this broadcast. If you want to call me tomorrow, I'll check it out. And if it turns out to be true and the listening audience needs to hear it, then, we'll make arrangements for you to call in, and it can be your story, and we'll do it. But that's the only way it's done on this broadcast. All of these other people, they take phone calls. And a lot of these phone calls are people spreading rumors. And these rumors, 99% of them turn out to be wrong. And it's wrong to allow that to happen. Especially when the host takes it and runs with it. Listen carefully.
Cash machines are failing in Britain and now other European countries. They're finding large amounts of explosives in France. Vladimir Putin, who is known as Vladimir the Ruthless, and using all his profanity on national TV, you name it. We won't read the profanity here, but we've got it. This person is on an unbelievable power trip and resembles a demon. He is a creature of the IMF and the World Bank and international communism. He is a former KGB head. And this information is vital, ladies and gentlemen. We are seeing the New World Order really come out in full force. More wars than have been in the last 50 years are going on right now. The war in Chechnya is raging in Grozny with, reports of hundreds of thousands dying.
Is that true, folks?
20 to 40,000 civilians trapped in the city. Russian Hinds are being shot down. Tanks are being blown to bits. Massive Grad unguided rocket attacks are being launched on the city indiscriminately right now. Air and artillery bombardments as well. It's absolutely out of control. It is pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. The power from it failed, but they say it's not a Y2K problem. And the things I'm experiencing here in Austin, Texas, the shelves are empty of water and some gas stations are running out of fuel. Here in Central Texas and in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the shortwave is basically down, ladies and gentlemen. Went off right as I went on the air. The big news on Y2K. Then we'll start going to your calls.
And what happened to Bill Cooper? Interesting story. November 5th, 2001, he was shot dead by Apache County Sheriff's deputies in his Arizona hometown because he had threatened several residents of Edgar with a firearm, and when they went to arrest him, he engaged in a shootout with them and was shot during the exchange of fire. Come to find out, he also had a 1998 federal arrest warrant for something to do with weapons, and he had told federal marshals several times he would not be taken alive, and so he wasn't. So that's who's criticizing Alex Jones. Keep that in mind as we move on. Let's jump in. Since 1999, we did have the burgeoning internet, thanks to Al Gore. U.S. military invented the internet, but a running joke around my house is Al Gore invented it. But anyway, so he became one of the first internet broadcasters, and he created the Alex Jones Show, later titled InfoWars, where he broadcast basically what was on his conservative talk radio show and his public access, which he also gave up around the same time, and broadcasted it across the internet, where it was available in early 2000 to over 100 different radio stations. So they would take it off the web and broadcast it. So this conspiracy stuff was popular, and he gave them just what he wanted. He began to actually call out politicians by name. He actually did this from a room in his house, supposedly a child's bedroom that had little choo-choo train wallpaper all over the walls. And he became kind of a watchdog in local government. He would actually, he had several Republican candidates on that kind of fell into the, the same sphere as he did. And he would talk about everything from the Illuminati to, you know what the stuff Alex Jones talks about. In July of 2000, he was actually accused by other talk radio show hosts and other people on Austin Public Access as trying to get their shows taken off the air. He basically silencing anyone that criticized him. So he used his power to be able to do that. He launched several investigative reports against local businesses that didn't support him, against other media personalities, and basically would announce the results of these investigations on his show on InfoWars. And then 9/11 happened. And I think we all know about 9/11. I don't need to rehash that here. But after 9/11, viewership and listenership to the Alex Jones show actually quadrupled. And he began to put forth the theory that 9/11 was an inside job. And this caused a flurry of activity, a flurry of talk surrounding Alex Jones, and enabled InfoWars to become the beginnings of the media empire we know it to be today. And just like what happened to him after his 2000, Y2K broadcast, he becoming the leader in the 9/11 truther calls caused several of the radio stations that were carrying him to drop him. Now, for those of you that don't know what 9/11 truth is, I'm not saying you should. You're probably a much better, happier person not knowing it. But basically, it's the theory that it was all planned by the U.S. government, and that what happened on 9/11 was controlled demolition. Now, yeah, I agree. I think that's out there. I do not follow that at all. I think we were the victims of a terrorist attack. And, yeah. But so you can understand why a lot of stations started to drop his show, and why he actually started to get protests by people against him. As you can imagine, families of those that lost people in 9/11 were not real happy with Alex Jones, and that would go on to be a continuing theme in his life, where he kind of did nasty things and then drew the vitriol of the survivors of tragedy, which we will get to. And so as a result, a lot of the radio stations dropped. He began to appear on watch lists. For example, in 2006, he was on his way to cover a political event in Ottawa, Canada, where he was detained by Canadian officials at the Ottawa airport. They confiscated his passport, they confiscated all of his equipment, and detained him, causing him to miss the event. And there was lots of video of Alex Jones going off. There was a screaming match, and eventually they let him go, and he was able to re-enter Canada legally later on. But he even admitted he could have handled it better, that he let his temper get the best of him. So he kind of became kind of a pariah, so to speak. As you can, especially among foreign governments, a lot of countries didn't want him in their country because of the kind of stuff that he did. The United States government, I'm sure, was watching him as well. So you would have a lot of different events where he would be unceremoniously stopped or prevented from doing certain things that would, again, he would turn around. He was a true media man. He would turn around and use that to gain popularity and to gain clout for his show, because as we know, be it on YouTube, the more controversial something is, the better. And as a result, Jones started to create ruckuses. 2007, he was arrested when he and his crew crashed a live taping of the Geraldo Rivera show on Fox News, and was charged with disorderly conduct, gathering without a permit, using a megaphone without a permit, because he and his crew just barged up in there and started, yelling their conspiracy theories at Geraldo, and Geraldo wasn't a fan. So there you go. He would also do that in, I believe, 2016 at the Republican National Convention, where he also crashed a broadcast by the internet news, liberal news outlet Young Turks. He also crashed their broadcast, and I happen to have video of that, so I'm going to drop that right here.
The demographics is that he wins white males in such overwhelming numbers that it overcomes every other demographic advantage Hillary has.
Come sit in your lap.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Hey, Alex Jones, how you doing?
See you, man. You're looking sexy.
All right.
Hey, how's the revolution going? You guys starting the revolution?
We are indeed, Alex. The revolution is afoot. Welcome to the Young Turks.
You know what's wrong with America, isn't I?
I am going to restore American democracy along with progressives and conservatives in this country.
All right. Well, I got to tell you, I am really, really proud to be here with you. It's good to meet you in person.
I don't think
How are you guys doing?
we're doing okay.
You like all our Hillary for President shirts everywhere?
No, I kind of despise it.
What shirts are they? I haven't seen any of them.
You haven't seen? Oh my God! You didn't see me? I don't exist if you didn't see me.
I'm not.
All right, guys. Okay. Here,
Look at this.
let me
I
see.
got a new shirt for you right here. It's rape. It's Bill Clinton that says rape. Oh God, hide that immediately. That's the big no that Roger Stone's banned.
All right, you want to take my show over? I'll take your show
Sure,
over.
go ahead.
Okay, you know what? Who does this kind of shirt? First of all, a sick guy. Second of
Bill
all,
Clinton's
you
not
know,
a rapist, folks.
you know who's accused in
Get
court
it, Stone,
papers.
come on.
You know who's accused in court papers of being a rapist? Donald J. Trump. Donald Trump, Roger Stone. You know that. It's in court papers.
Oh, yeah.
And you're a sick dude, Roger Stone.
Hey, I want to have a rant off with you right now.
So controversy, whether it followed him or he created it, was instrumental in building up the InfoWars empire. It was in 2014 that the actual name of the Alex Jones Show was officially changed to InfoWars, and the website InfoWars.com was officially monikered. His radio show, which was again syndicated to conservative talk, was broadcast nationally by Genesis Communications Network to more than 100 AM and FM stations. And by 2010, he was attracting 2 million visitors each week. So his antics in 2006, 2007 paid off, and people wanted to find out who this person was. He was covered by many media outlets, articles in Rolling Stone and People and Time, people wanting to know. And he also produced more films, several more films. Touting his 9/11 truther theory, the Illuminati theory, the theory that the New World Order is upon us, and those got national attention because he also was able to get others in the public eye. You remember Quiverful Pastor Steven Anderson? He teamed up with Alex Jones on a couple of his films.
Christ, of course, did as well, but that wasn't really a man. You can go back and forth. The point is God in man's body. The point is, this is the real deal, ladies and gentlemen, okay? And they hate Christians and they hate gun owners because they know we understand what's going on. That's the litmus test that we know they're authoritarians. Now, he's with us for this hour and a little bit into the next hour. After the Tribulation, a film that they even did an InfoWars-style trailer without us even saying it. So I went ahead and tagged on my own promo onto it. It's up at Infowars.com right now. But After the Tribulation, Let No Man Deceive You. Everyone needs to buy this at InfoWarsStore.com and go give it to their pastor, their preachers, and others. And again, Pastor Steve Anderson is famously 100-mile-in checkpoints. He's been beat up for asking questions. We'll play some of that later. He's the guy that said, he prays for Obama. you know, to be brought down, which is biblical, got demonized for that. Great to have you here, but let's get right in to this film and the scriptures and where this doctrine came, that it's a pre-tribulation rapture, so nobody's got to worry about anything. All the other Christians had to go through the fire, but, you know, this generation, as it's all coming down, we're going to be left alone.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Alex. Good to be here. I think this film is most important because if you want to know why Christians are asleep right now, if you want to know why the vast majority of Christians don't want to hear about the New World Order, they don't care when you warn them about global government or police state, it's because of this doctrine. This pre-trib rapture doctrine makes everybody believe that it doesn't really matter what's going on because we're all going to be out of here.
So yeah, Alex Jones knew no morals with whom he teamed up with. Let me just tell you. So as a result, more and more. And because of the nature of the broadcast that InfoWars gave, they were labeled by many websites as fake news conspiracy theories. I don't think I needed to tell you that, though. But being that advertising was hard to do on such a website, even though he got himself on YouTube, Spotify, and got paid for the ads that would run, he had to figure out a way to make his own money, to generate his own income. So his mail order business was born, and that is very simply being able to... He sold stuff. And I have a little clip here that will kind of tell you, and this business has become even more important since he was banned from most of the major streaming sites, and now all of his traffic is organic, not filtered from other sites. So I'm going to drop a little segment I filmed here as I go through the store on his website. We talk about some of it. So here's that for you.
How does Alex Jones make his money? That's kind of something, since he's been taken off Spotify, off YouTube, off basically any site where you can monetize with ads. And if you go to his actual website, unlike other very high traffic websites, you don't see the ads that you see on others. So we know he's not getting ad revenue. He's not partnered with Google AdSense. They took that away, when he was kicked off YouTube. Also, any other ad agency that would normally monetize a website or a blog is probably not going to partner with him either. So how does Alex Jones make his money? Well, from donations from his followers. I believe he's on Subscribestar. I believe Patreon ended his partnership, so he's not there. But he also sells supplements, and I'm here on the InfoWars store just to see what kind of stuff he offers. All kinds of vitamins, solar battery packs, anything you would need for an apocalyptic situation. That's what Alex Jones sells. And here you can see, he's got iodine spray, beet extract, and Ultra 12 Energy, Turbo Force to increase your metabolism. He sells these in bundles. And he also sells t-shirts. He was the one that coined the term "a Hillary for prison," the shirt that got so big in the 2016 Donald Trump election. That was actually Alex Jones. So he earns his money by selling stuff. And as you can see here, there's no end to the amount of stuff that he sells. And according to his website, this is all bestsellers. So anything that his loyal followers will buy, he will sell. And that's how Alex Jones makes his money.
So as you can see, his income consists mainly now of selling supplements, food for apocalyptic situation. He sells DVDs and Blu-rays of his own movies. He sells compilations of his show. He sells books that he's written or that people that work for him have written, since all other revenues have kind of been taken off. But it is estimated between the views that hit 6 million views a month that still hit InfoWars, as well as everything he sells. And he also operates 2 other websites, prisonplanet.com and newswars.com. He generates around $20 million a year in revenue. So he's doing okay, for sure. But the one thing that we all know Alex Jones for is the controversy. And there have been so much more than I just covered. You know, the small little interrupting crowds and causing a ruckus kind of things. But there has been others that have really pulled at the heartstrings of America. And we're going to get into 2 of them. Let's jump in. Probably the most well-known is the one we're going to cover first, and that is the controversy surrounding the Sandy Hook school shooting. We know what happened in 2018. Jones was sued by 6 families of Sandy Hook victims and investigated by the FBI for defamation and for basically causing their lives to be even more terrible than since losing their children in 2012 in the actual shooting, because he was ascertaining this theory that Sandy Hook was, again, fake. It was government faked. It was crisis actors and things like that. And he was sued, and I actually have a deposition tape from that suit that we will look at in a moment. But basically, Jones later on, both on the Joe Rogan show and in this testimony you're about to look at, confessed that it was his own delirium that caused him to, his own fixation, his own mini psychosis that caused him to believe, he believes he had a mental breakdown is what caused him to say that Sandy Hook never happened. But he swears up and down to this day he never told his followers to harass the parents of those children. And Sandy Hook, of course, happened December 2012, where a lone gunman entered a school and shot several teachers and students dead. As a huge Second Amendment gun advocate, Jones, of course, covered the story right away, and he continued to cover it over the years. And finally, about 2014 is when the first messings of him tying it into other conspiracies, saying that it didn't really happen. It was all crisis actor. I don't know if that term literally means people that are hired by the government or someone else to pretend that a tragedy has occurred and then play it up for the public, because it was a conspiracy by the government to take our guns. And so here is a clip from both the Joe Rogan experience, where Alex Jones explains his psychosis, and then a deposition tape from one of the attorneys on the case that was suing him on behalf of the families, where he explains what happened as well. So I'm going to drop both those clips right here.
Now, the quote fame of being super famous, being the conspiracy guy, I was legitimately questioning things because of Gulf of Tonkin, Northwoods, things that really happened, babies that weren't thrown out of incubators to get us in the Iraq War. But I kind of realized a few years ago that I kind of had my own mild psychosis, in that when you've been lied to by the media and the culture so much over and over again, everything then starts becoming automatically, you're sure it's fake, and then everything you see fits into that. This is probably, again, 4 or 5 years ago, I began to realize, because I was on the receiving end, it's fake. And then there's people that believe everything they hear is true. I mean, you should be questioning, you should have the right to do it, but it's somewhere in the middle.
You ever seen that before?
I don't remember.
You're not sure if you've seen this before?
No.
Okay. You'll see up at the top it has a timestamp, 12/14/12.
Yes.
You know that's the date of Sandy Hook, right?
I don't know.
You don't know that?
Is that the date?
It is.
Okay.
It is, Mr. Jones. You will admit, I mean, you've done mocking imitations of Sandy Hook parents crying, correct?
No.
I want to play you a video clip, too, from September 24th, 2014 and November 11th, 2016. Will you play the video clip called Crying?
And then you've got parents laughing, going, and then they walk over to the camera and go, and not just one, but a bunch of parents doing this. Then we see footage of one of the reported fathers of the victims, Robbie Parker, doing classic acting training where he's laughing and joking, and they say, hey, we're live. And he goes, oh. And maybe that's real. I'm sure it is.
You realize now you were mocking the difficult emotional reactions of people who provably lost their children.
No, I was not mocking. I was showing what people were questioning. It was not to mock the parents. It was showing why people were questioning. It's you that is projecting mocking.
So there you go. He had to settle out of court with these families for their defamation suit. As far as I know, he never faced any criminal charges or any jail time for it. Also, the other major conspiracy he's known, or controversy he's known for, is Pizzagate, where during his involvement in the 2016 election, he was instrumental in helping Donald Trump get elected. He had Donald Trump, Roger Stone, on his show many, many times. He interviewed Donald Trump many, many times, and as a result, views of the InfoWars YouTube channel and other avenues skyrocketed as a result. And so he got more and more views as a result and was instrumental in getting Donald Trump elected. Well, part of that was what is known as Pizzagate, where he was saying that code words used by Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, other Washington elites, Hollywood elites, where they would talk about getting pizza or cheese, were really code for a child sex trafficking ring that was running out of Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington, D.C. And as a result, a lone shooter actually tried to enter the pizzeria and make the ring go away. And as a result, he had to publicly apologize to the owner, James Alfontes, and publicly apologize and say that he did not mean to cause anyone to do those things. And this is what eventually caused his removal from Spotify, YouTube, name it, Facebook, name it. All of his stuff was taken off because of these sorts of things. I guess these tech companies, I don't like censorship, but they are private companies. Even though I think it's a dangerous precedent to say, I can see why he was removed after these incidents. So you have to be very careful what you say. So it's not that the government's not allowing him to say it. It's just these tech companies don't want to be held responsible for it. Now, I think it's a slippery slope. I personally would like to be able to watch Alex Jones on InfoWars. I mean, on YouTube. I think he's entertaining. But for the most part, he's not there. He was also criticized for his coverage of the Unite the Right rally in 2017 in Charlottesville, where one protester was killed. He's been criticized for almost getting sued by the Chobani yogurt company because he said that their employment of immigrants was causing more tuberculosis to be released into the United States. And it was also connected to child sex trafficking. So, yeah, you can say Alex Jones is a little bit off the rails. Just a little bit. His wife of 8 years, Kelly, divorced him in 2018. And as a result of that trial, his attorney actually said that Jones was a character actor. That Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist, was a role that Alex Jones, the man, played. That he really didn't believe these things. It was just a role. Now, I don't know about that. I think some of what Alex Jones, knowing what I know about how he was easily influenced in his teenage years from reading the Gary Allen book and then going on to talk about so much, putting out movies, I don't think that's an extent that I don't think anybody would go to playing a role. I believe Alex Jones believes a lot of this stuff. I really do. If you are a true InfoWars aficionado, you live, breathe, and literally eat this stuff. Because if you truly follow his plan, you stay away from processed foods, you order your supplements from him, you eat whole foods, you even have purifying straws and filters that you use to drink water. because you don't trust government water. People that are really into this are really into this. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know. But it's very entertaining. And if you have a sound mind and can watch this and just take it for what it is, then you'll have a good time watching them. However, if you are susceptible to having your beliefs altered, or you are susceptible to believing this sort of thing anyway, I highly recommend staying away from Alex Jones. It's wild. And as we sit right now, we know he's been banned from all streaming services. The only place you can see him is Infowars.com or through compilation clips that are still on YouTube. And I highly encourage you to check it out. And review. I have got a synopsis of the author of the book or the two authors of the book that set Alex Jones on his road to conspiracy, probably Bill Moore as well, is Gary Allen and Larry Abraham's None Dare Call It Conspiracy. That's what the background of the two authors. First, Frederick Gary Allen. Let's get into it. Frederick Gary Allen was born August 2nd, 1936. He grew up in California, lived in California the majority of his life, and was a conservative writer, conspiracy theorist, and political pundit. So think of him as like a political talking head for his generation. That's what he did. And he attended Stanford University, which that definitely means he's either well-connected or very intelligent, and he majored in history. He then studied a few subjects at California State University in Long Beach, and became a prominent member of the John Birch Society, which we will also talk about. The John Birch Society is an ultra-conservative, right-wing think tank. It has been called let's just say it's been called a white conspiracy think tank, white supremacy. I can't prove or affirm that. I just know it is a conservative think tank that is still around. He was a spokesman for them, and he also wrote for their magazines, Conservative Digest and The American Opinion. He was a speechwriter for George Wallace during his brief run for the presidency in the 60s. For those of you who don't know, me being from Alabama, George Wallace is something that I can speak intelligently on. He was a racist. He was an asshole. But he did do some very good things for the state of Alabama, I have to admit, like establishing our community college system. So you have to give props where props are due, even though I think his views on race were the pits. He was the one that famously stood in the door to keep the University of Alabama from being integrated, which I think seals him in the world forever as being an asshole. But he also ran for president at one time in 1968 on the Dixiecrat ticket, which was kind of where the Democratic Party conservatives split off from the more liberal Democrats during the Civil Rights Movement and formed their own party. So he ran against Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon, of course coming in third, and did not get elected, thank goodness. And Gary Allen wrote his speeches for his presidential run. Among Allen's most well-known works is the 1971 book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, that we're going to review today, written with his co-writer, Larry Abraham. Allen would die in 1986 of liver failure in Long Beach, California. So let's talk about Larry Abraham, shall we? Larry Abraham was born October 29th, 1937. He is an American entrepreneur, businessman, and author, founder of Pan American Capital Group, and was a talking head on political, economic, and financial issues. Also a member of the John Birch Society, which is where he met Gary Allen. The book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, was written by them in 1971. During the 1972 presidential election, it sold over 1 million copies, which is unprecedented for a book. a paperback book in that era. The book even had a foreword by a popular conservative independent politician at the time, John George Schmitz. He was a Republican member of the House of Representatives from California, and a California state senator as well from Orange County, also a member of the John Birch Society. Which John Birch, as I said before, is a conservative think tank, anti-communism, pro-capitalism, has been called a white supremacy group, though I can't affirm or deny that. In 1972, Schmitz, who wrote the foreword for the book, was a candidate for President of the United States as an independent, and it was later known as the American Party, one of the many third parties that you can find still in existence. And he was definitely an interesting character. Schmitz, he did have a long, illustrious career in Congress. He was, as I said, very ultra-conservative, but probably one of the most damning things about him, he was a Holocaust denier. So keep that in mind as you listen to my review of this book. I'm not saying that Alan and Larry Abraham were, but the guy that wrote the foreword, which begins with a stark warning about complacency and allowing people to control you, was written by him, who was also a Holocaust denier. Where are all those Jews then? Idiot. It's probably why the John Birch Society actually kicked his ass out, which I think is funny. But anyway, so let's get back to the book. Okay, what is in 𝐤𝐤𝐿 conspiracy? Well, it's interesting. It mainly warns people against the evils of communism, but not communism as we think it is, which I think is one of the most interesting parts of the book. It really breaks it down. We will go over that. It mainly talks about how the power elite, and we're talking about politicians, the heads of major banks, especially international banks, as well as a lot of international corporations. You will recognize a lot of names that get mentioned in this book, as well as Hollywood celebrities, all the stuff you hear about the elites today. They're in this book. And it talks about how the government, these elites in small increments, have controlled everything that has ever happened in history, and it's all leading up to the establishment of a new world order. And their main way of controlling us is through banking. For example, the income tax is a way of extorting money from the common man. The central bank, which makes loans to government entities, is a way of controlling governments. And then you turn around and have, these centralized banks holding all the national debt, again, control the government. And then how these banks were able to manipulate and actually cause the world wars, which we will also talk about. And so it's literally the foundation of most conspiracy theories that we think of, whether it be the Illuminati or power elite or World Bank or anything. It can be linked to this book. And it was written by Larry Abraham, Gary Allen, with the foreword by Mr. Schmitz. So, without further ado, let's get into my analysis of 𝐤𝐤𝐿 conspiracy. Okay, to fully understand this book, we have to talk about Schmitz's foreword, which I said is a stark warning about complacency and trusting the government. He starts with saying to picture an artist that is painting a picture for you. And he says, what do you see when you think about government? You see them all saying the same thing. They want to stop, remember this is 1971, they want to stop communism, they want to stop crime, they want to stem the morality crisis that is plaguing our country and causing more looseness and a cesspool of evil to engulf the country, and they want to stem the debt. But he says, have you ever noticed how they don't do any of those things, and they simply continue with the policies of their predecessor, not doing anything about any of those, in fact, adding to the debt,
that, and not do anything about crime, not doing anything about anything, and yet they were condemning their predecessor all through their campaign, and this is directed at both parties. And yet they end up basically continuing on with what their predecessor was doing. And that struck a nerve because that happens a lot. And then he goes into two different theories on history: accidental and planned. Accidental is what is taught and touted, he said, in American education, American universities, and world universities and world school systems, is an accidental version of history. How nothing was planned, outside of a few things, like somebody planned to build the city of Rome. Okay, we know that. But was Alexander the Great's invasion of the entire world pre-planned, or did he just do it? I mean, it was pre-planned to a certain extent, but what we're talking about is how what they're talking about is how everything in history was, in the accidental view, was not planned. It just happened and the world went with it. Barring the micro planning that would have to take place in all of these scenarios. So that is the one that is taught. And then he talks about the planned theory of history, was that nothing has happened since the since the creation of modern man. Nothing has happened accidentally. It was all planned from soup to nuts, all planned, all for the ultimate goal of transforming us into a one world government. And he says, if you mention this in colleges or you mention this in school, it is ridiculed and you're called a crazy conspiracy theorist. But in this book, they lean toward that definition of history, how everything was planned out. And planned out by a group of very few people, which you're going to recognize a lot of the names. And so he says that this book will be a summary of the previous 6 presidential administrations. So, and I actually looked this up, 1971 is when this was written. So we have to assume he's talking about FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and finally Nixon, who was president when this book came out. So he then goes into talking about what he calls poison ivy, or university education, and how they are brainwashing everyone to believe in the accidental version of the accidental theory of history, that they tout ignorance, and that history is not what you think because the winners of wars write the history, and that's absolutely true. They do. But I don't know what to say about that. That is kind of a scary thought. But, the winners do write the history, so it may or may not be the truth, I suppose, and that is food for thought. I'm just glad that we do have the internet right now where you can look up stuff, but who's authoring stuff on... See, this is why you need to be strong when you read these kind of books, because they can get in. They got into my head. Like I said, I had hairs on the back of my neck standing up when I read some of this. So, and some of it, like I said, there's enough truth in most conspiracy that it'll really make you think. All right. And then he goes on again to talk about how this type of history education is a play, and everything is to make you think that everything is by accident, nothing is planned. And then how they ridicule people that talk about the planned theory of history as kooky conspiracy theorists, right-wing extremists. And he admits that some do go off the rails with it, but you're not too far from the truth if you think that this could and is happening. And this is the Holocaust denier writing this, remember, the forward. Schmitz didn't believe the Holocaust happened. Whatever. All right, then he goes into touting how everyone is tracked from birth with a social security number, how that was all planned from the beginning, and how it's going to get worse. And then he talked about mainstream media. Oh my God, so much of this is like right on, just it's current topics. Either people don't change all that much or they were on to something. I would really like to think that it's just that people don't change. And then he talks about how the media is the purveyor of everything. They are really the one that push this accidental theory of history, and how they've covered up many, many things in history. He talks about, like FDR, Franklin if Franklin D. Roosevelt had polio so bad in his second term or third term that he couldn't walk, yet he was seen on media walking with the help of two aides on either side, and how the media covered that up. I truly believe, and that's a fact, but I also, rather than believing that it's like some evil conspiracy to keep us from the truth, I think it was maybe just the respect that the media had for our government leaders during a World War situation, and that maybe because he had to be strong, that they didn't want to, make the American people even. I mean, this is the man that was giving the fireside chats that says you have nothing to fear but fear itself. So, but yet he couldn't walk. So how would that reign with the American public? I think the media felt it was in the public's best interest to have them recognize FDR as a strong person. I think it was just the respect that the media had. Oh, have we have changed? Oh my God. So anyway, I think that's more where it was coming from, but he uses it to say that, okay, they are lying to us. Then he talks, and then the forward does end, and then we actually get into the actual meat of the book. And it begins with the stories of Hitler and Lenin, saying that they were both born unprivileged, fairly unprivileged, middle class. They both wrote down their plans for domination while in prison, and how easy it would be for an elite person in a position of power to be planning this even today, just like Lenin and just like Hitler. He alludes to the fact that their rise to power were planned by the elites. That Hitler's rise to power was completely planned, as was Lenin's, and then also into Stalin. So all of this was just a way to begin the process. So we're beginning with Hitler and Stalin, or Hitler and Lenin, and how this was part of the grand plan to enslave the world into under one big monarchy. So why Hitler and why Stalin? Let's talk about that. Now, I have some thoughts on that. So let's look at Hitler. Let's look at Hitler and Lenin, since they were kind of going through their transition almost the same time. Hitler was born in the 1800s. He did serve in the German army under the Kaiser in World War I. After the end of World War I, the Kaiser was deposed, and Germany was under the Weimar Republic, which wasn't doing a very good job. There was hyperinflation. There was no jobs. They had been basically forced into signing a treaty that would suck them dry for many, many years to come. And so they were in a depression. And as a result, Hitler and his Nazi party, who promised, Germany first, jobs for Germany, rose to power pretty easily. Now, I think that, to me, that aligns more on accidental empowerment, just that Hitler was able to capitalize on what was going on, the political unrest and the political upheaval, to do what he did, rather than some global conspiracy that caused World War I and caused the decline of Germany. I mean, I know people can't keep secrets for shit. So I don't think that this conspiracy could last for this many years with no one knowing about it. I mean, okay, these crazy conspiracy theorists know about it, but if this was really a conspiracy, wouldn't they kill him? And I guess you could go back to, well, maybe they allow them to live so nobody will believe the conspiracy. There's always a what if, but I am a lot more inclined to believe that Hitler's rise to power was just it was just the happenstance. He capitalized on a weak point in German history. The same could be said for a lot of different people. Look at Lenin. Lenin was also born in the 1800s. He was a studier of the works of Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto. He came to be a kind of a rabble-rouser, a protest leader, which got him jailed by Tsar Nicholas II a couple of times, and then would eventually be freed and then the Germans would actually fund Lenin to go in and essentially cause the Bolshevik Revolution, which helped them defeat Russia during World War I and allowed then the Bolsheviks to kill the Tsar and take over. So I'm a little more inclined to believe that Lenin's rise to power might have been planned by the Germans to win the war. That's a little more of a what I consider a micro manipulation. But I don't think that there was any diabolical plan in Hitler's rise to power, if that makes sense. So anyway, and then he goes on to say that he's interviewed 6 highly placed military officers that will, concur with what he says. And then he goes on to talk about current day, 1972, that Americans are consumed with anti-communism. This is 20 years, post-McCarthy, where they actually put people on federal trial for suspicion of being a communist. But then he goes on to say that no one really knows what communism is, that no one can really define it. There is many people, he said, that if you ask, they will say it is Russian imperialism rebirth. So it's the rejoining of the Russian Empire to bring back the Tsar. That's communism. Then people will say it's Marxism, which is probably the most well-known, the Marxist theory of everything belonging to the people and equality of people, but yet that always seems to fall under some authoritarian type of government. Then there's the economic theory, to each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And then there's just radical socialism, which is basically, but even Stalin and Lenin said that socialism, the goal of socialism is communism. So there you go. And then he says, if you look at every different communist regime around the world, he mentioned Castro in Cuba, he mentioned Mao in China, he mentioned Pol Pot in Cambodia. He says every single one of these proclaimed to be the leader of a communist regime, yet they all do it differently. And the Soviet Union was very different than any of these other places, that how no one can really put their finger on communism. And then he goes, that's why these elites are so dangerous, because they have everybody warring against communism, but nobody knows what communism is. And he said in this book, they're going to go off the theory that it is a push to unite the world under one authoritarian government to control the entire globe. And he says this happens in several different ways. And then he goes into talking about something called money manipulators, and how literally the control of money will control governments. And I can see how this is true. He talks about the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and when I actually delved into these organizations, they were all created around the same time. They're a family of 5 different international organizations that actually lend money to third world governments to help them defeat poverty and get into the first world, basically. So yeah, these are international banking firms that are supported by first world countries that help third world countries, but then hold these countries' national debts and can control them. Again, hair stood up on the back of my head. The World Bank is usually presided over by an American, and then the International Monetary Fund itself is based in Washington, D.C., and that people worldwide, countries worldwide, depend on the World Bank and the IMF for loans to actually make their government go. So that's one way that money manipulates everything. The other is what he calls international banking firms, and then he goes into telling us about the Rothschilds of France, who are also the Rothschilds of England, the Rothschilds of Germany, and it's a huge international banking conglomerate ran by a Jewish family. This is kind of where the whole Jewish control the banking system theory comes from. And so he talks about their hand in so many historical events. These Rothschilds have used Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto to enslave countries for years and prepare their people for ultimate control. The very thing they inspire people to war against, they are using, and they are using it by virtue of what they call the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. And this is how you prepare a country for this version of communism and then essentially world domination. So let's see what those 10 planks are, shall we? First is the abolition of property rights and property ownership, where the government basically controls all the land and allows the people to live on it for a price. This is kind of what happens in Germany, where you were not allowed, I mean, not Germany, but China. My apologies to the German people. China, you are not allowed to own land in China. You can only lease it for 75 years. That's the reason a lot of Chinese investors buy American property, which is a whole other different problem. And then they go on to talk about how zoning laws and the government telling you what you can and can't build in certain areas is preparing us for the abolition of property rights. I'm not sure what to think about that. I think zoning laws are good to a certain extent because you don't want a titty bar next to a school. I think that's a good idea. But I see that some of them can get out of hand. A heavily progressive tax. They say that taxing you more, the more you make, is preparing you for giving all of your income to the government. I am a proponent of a flat tax. I think a flat tax is much more. I think it should just be 15, 20, 25% across the board. That's what you pay. No deductions. Get rid of the IRS, but I'm not getting into all of that. But they say a progressive tax is preparing you to give all your money away. Abolition of the rights of inheritance, which will go along to property rights. And they say that death and real estate and estate taxes are part of this. Confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels, and hint how the police can seize your property when you're arrested for a crime, not even convicted of a crime, but arrested for a crime. Freeze your bank account, seize your home, blah, blah, blah. I think that should be abolished. And then by controlling by controlling all the credit, hence the Federal Reserve, paper money, reserve banking, and then the centralization of the means of communications. They're talking about the FCC, Department of Transportation. Equal liability of all labor, which means that certain trade partners have a most favored nation status, and they say, why are we so heavily partnered with communists? Like China is our most favored nation. And then the combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, so that the government can control everything. And then finally, the one that really made the hair stand up on the back of my head, free education, abolition of child labor, which I think that's a good thing. And then a completely government-run education system which teaches them the accidental theory of history. And also kind of turns them into little activists. And we do see that happening quite a bit with some of the public school systems, though we are, fighting back. There are charter schools, there are private schools. I'm all about choice in education. Again, it's kind of hard not to get political when you're covering something like this. But I don't think we are completely beholden to the government for our education. We have way too many options, but that's what they're saying. Remember, this was written in 1972. And then they talk about how the income tax was our first step on the way to this, and how that a many international banking, like the Rothschilds and other international banking families, pushed for the end of the Russian Tsar Nicholas, and which helped set Lenin up for the Bolshevik Revolution and the creation of the Soviet Union, which they say is the model for the one world government. Now, I will say that I believe Lenin was funded by the Germans in an effort to help them win the war against Russia. But do I believe it was a big international conspiracy? No, I don't, because I don't know. I just don't. I don't think that this could be kept secret. And also the Soviet Union failed. So ultimately, it failed. So, we were still in the midst of the Cold War, or even the beginnings of the Cold War at this time. So I can understand how they would say that the Soviet Union is the plan for us all. But the Soviet Union no longer exists. And then they talk about Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations, and how the League of Nations and the United Nations pushed us even closer, and how that the Rothschilds, together with the Rockefellers, another international business conglomerate that controls everything, helped bring about World War II so that they could get the League of Nations and the United Nations confirmed, and so that there would be things like NATO and the Warsaw Pact, which was, you know, for the longest time during the Cold War, was all the communist nations together with the Soviet Union. So it would get the world ready for these, like, these were regional governments that were getting the world ready for one world government. But again, Warsaw Pact no longer exists. Soviet Union no longer exists. Many of those countries that were beholden to the Soviet Union are now free and independent. They talk about how East Germany, but you know, East Germany is now reunited, thank goodness. So a lot of this gets lost between 1972 and today because they don't know what we know now. And then they talk about how these conglomerates actually took over the media, and how your media is only owned by 2 or 3 different companies. And if you would look at it, yeah, I think we have maybe 10 media companies that control all the media in the world. That's scary, which is why I like to get my news from independent journalists. And I think everyone should, to get a balanced approach, because they are very political in what they feed us. And then they talk about, of course, conservatives disguised as liberals that are trying to bring down conservatism. Like I said, these are ultra right-wing people. And then the final part of the book just goes in, it's a pretty short book. The final part of the book goes into how it's up to the common person to stop this and don't let them call you crazy. And I can see how this would have electrified so many of the modern conspiracy theorists that we know, like Alex Jones. I really think that this was just the perfect storm. And if I can imagine reading this as a teenager, and, you know, it being the early 90s and not everything, you know, the Berlin Wall just fell, the Soviet Union just collapsed. So not quite seeing it the way we see it through the lens of history. So I can really see how this book could have electrified Alex Jones. I also think it's a fun read. It's a good read. Some of it does still ring true today. I think having monopolies on things like media and other things that we consume for our news is dangerous. I think any kind of monopoly on education, I think there should be a good balance of public and private education, religious and secular. I don't think there should be one monopoly, because then you can't control what the next generation believes. Anyway, and none dare call it conspiracy. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back soon with another video. And until next time, Keto Comics.